I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to D2Z, a podcast about using the Gen Z mindset to grow your business. I'm Gen Z entrepreneur Brandon Amoroso, founder and president of Retention as a Service Agency, Electric. And today I'm joined by Roger Beaman, founder of Novel, previous founder of Smarter, and also a senior advisor to one of our close partners, the CEO of Recharge. So really excited to have you on.
Excited to be on. Thank you, Brandon. Yeah.
Before we start grilling each other here, can you give everybody a quick sort of TLDR on yourself and your background?
Sure. And by the way, I just realized I myself have a trucker hat here. I actually just recently visited Nebraska. This is a trucker hat from a trucking company that my friend works at. So it's legit. So now we match. So, TLDR on myself, I studied finance, was a financial analyst, then got super into programming, and sort of, took this winding path. Eventually ended up at Goldman Sachs, where I was what they call a strat there, which is kind of like their finance plus programming people. Then I worked at a startup, commercial real estate startup called Reonomy. It was super awesome. We still do reunions with 50% of the company showing up. So it was a really special little family there. And that sort of showed me what a startup could be and made me interested in doing it. And a kind of bizarre little nuance is the first place I worked at as an engineer, this billionaire guy who had been running the company was they kind of took me under his wing and was like, you should start companies. And so he had been kind of pushing me to do that, but I was like, I kind of like this engineering stuff. I don't know if I want to do that. But with this experience at Reonomy, I was like, all right, I kind of got an idea of how cool doing a startup could be. And so the next time he came calling, I was like, okay, let's try this. It was middle of COVID. It was crazy. Started a subscription company that a lot of people have probably heard of called Smarter. And, that was through a heck of a lot of hard work and some luck. That went really well, really quickly. Basically, there's the obvious question would be why I'm not there anymore. And I think candidly, in situations where you do really well, really quickly, sometimes that brings out the worst in some people. And I woke up one day without the company I had started, and that was really tough. But the cool part was that, I'd experienced what building a successful company was like, and a lot of the good parts of it. And I'd experienced this world of e-commerce, which I think is a really cool one to be in, that kind of opened up this whole new world to me. And then around that time, basically I'd formed a lot of good relationships with investors. Also the iOS change had happened, and traditional acquisition channels had been challenged. And so it was all right, basically Novel was formed around the idea of can we unlock a new way for brands to connect with their customers that can kind of change the economics of for these brands and ultimately make them more sustainable businesses, right? And really let them own their audience more. And so that was the mission that we began on. And and I would say that today we have delivered on that with this Wild Pass product that you and me have talked about a good bit, Brandon. but yeah, basically that, is this new way that the brands have to kind of surface their retention stack to customers and make all of their loyalty channels more effective, as well as unlock a new engagement channel for sending push notifications to their most engaged customers. And it's a free engagement channel, unlike email and SMS that cost money. It's for customers that have opted in, like by default, right? Because they've installed your wallet pass, so you don't have to worry about any legal concerns. And yeah, and it's also highly effective because it's kind of on your screen, on your lock screen before you even get to your email or SMS app, right? So so yeah, that is did I do well with the TLDR? Is that maybe it was too long of a TLDR?
No,
Oh,
it's perfect. I do have a couple questions though, based off of
sure.
some of the stuff that you touched on there. So I think like in general, entrepreneurship is over glorified in like the mainstream media. So
Yeah.
I guess what are some of the things that having on your end now started two separate companies?
hmm
What are like the gotchas or the things that you were like, wow, like shit, this really sucks. I didn't know that I was going to have to do like X, Y, and Z because I just saw these things that made it look like, I don't know, you flew around on private jets and brokered deals and TV nonsense.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think that the entrepreneurship gets sort of glorified, and like people most think of, when I myself was like in these corporate jobs, sort of like seeking inspiration, right? The I would like listen to like Steve Jobs, right, or these, or Elon Musk, right, and these different people that like I found really inspiring, right, and and you kind of think entrepreneurship is sort of being on a stage, and you almost think of it as being like a philosopher, right, and being this person that inspires other people and stuff like that, and like that's part of the job when you get to a certain point, right? But like the beginning, right, is crazy. Like it's like you like, and I think crazy in a way that like is hard to even convey. It's hard to really understand that until you do it. Like I had read about these, like Elon Musk. I'd heard, for example, I remember describe entrepreneurship as chewing glass and staring into the abyss, right? And like when you hear that, you're like, okay, that sounds kind of badass, right? But like then when you're actually doing it, when you like quit your job in the middle of a pandemic, right? And all of your friends, think you're crazy, right? And then you are, trying to raise money for a company that you started a couple months ago in a space you don't know about. And then you're trying to convince your friends that, I mean, I worked in finance, right? So I'm like trying to convince my friends that are working at like hedge funds and stuff to like quit their, highly paying jobs that they've worked their whole life to get, to come join me at a company that is kind of just me, right? And like the kind of line between being an entrepreneur and being unemployed at that stage is sort of very thin, right? And and you're trying to, but like you have to do it, right? And it's kind of like, so the early days are just like this crazy game of survival, and I think that like the only way, certainly, to go through that the first time is to just sort of burn the ships, if you will, right? At that time, I felt like I had no other choice than to figure out how to make it work. And I was going against Recharge, a $2 billion company, with you know 0.001% of the resources initially, and it's just kind of a bizarre game of like how you survive. I think another interesting thing is it's like you like you sort of think it, at least myself, I studied economics and finance, right? So it's sort of, you think in terms of strategy, right? And these like high level strategic things, right? Which is cool. And it's like great for like coming up with the idea and like a business that makes sense and stuff, right? But, I remember at one point it's like, all right, I've got like my first customer on the line here who is like the horse pills guy, right? Like selling, horse pills on subscription, right? And it's like, the strategy, the blah, 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 blah. Okay, what matters is every single call that I'm having with the horse pills guy, right? And like, all right, so like, what did he say last time, right? And it's so intensely operational and in the weeds, and kind of just this brick by brick building up, uh, and I think that is sort of lost when you hear that person that gets on the stage and has already made it, and at that point, it's their job to inspire people, right? Rather than Steve Jobs when he was like selling to like the computer hardware guy, right? Like you hear about like the first store that he sold to, right? And it's like all that mattered at that time was getting the whatever version of the Apple computer existed at that time to sell in that store, right? Um, but if you can make it through that and survive and not go crazy, which is hard, then you get to like the fun parts. I don't think, candidly, anyone enjoys that early part. Like I think and they might have to pretend that they do, or people do on podcasts, but I don't think anyone does. I think some people can survive it, and it's very hard.
Well, there's a couple things there. Like for one, I was so hesitant to tell people about electric in the early days.
Yeah.
Even when we were doing well, because it's like, yeah, sure, like whatever. Like you're unemployed, and
Yes.
you clearly just spend your time like watching Netflix or something, which couldn't have been further from the truth. But I enjoyed electric really before we had any clients, because like I just got to spend most of the day learning and thinking and strategizing, and then it's like the grind that like first 12 to 18 months was just really quite unrewarding and not satisfying in any way whatsoever. It was
Well, right now, you're about to be welcomed to, I mean, I don't know how much you're ready to talk about it yet, but with Scaleless, you're about to be, welcomed to the venture-backed world, where that beginning part when you've raised millions of dollars, and now, like, I mean, if you're a person that I suppose should be someone that can raise millions of dollars, then that feels like just you just grabbed a ton of accountability and put it onto your back, right? Like to make these people get a return on investment. I think that's one thing that's confusing too, actually, is like when you read about fundraising announcements, right? It kind of almost feels like that is the win, right? And really it's like, you've just kind of gotten like the ability to, push to the next level, right? But it's also just like this huge amount of accountability, right? It's like, it's not like Shark Tank where you like just pitch, one time and then these guys say yes or no. These are these like long-term relationships of trust that you build, right? And, and you're going to be like, talking to these guys like on a very regular basis, right? That have entrusted you with their money, right? And so, if, like I say, if you're the type of person that, like probably should have been the one that they invested in, right? Like that just kind of like feels like a huge weight of responsibility, right? So to the outside world, it looks like a win, right? But it's not like that money has just gone into your pocket. Like you've got to make that money work, right?
right.
So yeah. So anyways, that's what you're about to enter.
Well,
welcome.
I'm finding it more motivating than even making a return for yourself. Especially when it's like people you're close to who are giving you money, or like, well, shit, like if anything, I'm going to make this thing work because I need it to work for X, Y, and Z that have entrusted me to make it work.
100%. I mean, that's like, I would say honestly, part of the reason that I went the venture back route myself is because I know that if I tell people that like I'm going to do something and I'm responsible for them, I'm responsible for employees that I've, brought in, right? I'm responsible for customers that, I know intimately as well, right? Then like that is way more motivating to me than just, I'm going to, make a buck for myself, right? And it's like a thing in human nature too. Like people say that like people are more reliable with taking their dog to the vet than they are setting up their own doctor's appointments, right? And so at least for me, I kind of view it as almost a way to like trick myself into working harder. So yeah,
what are the differences between starting a product in a space that already exists? It was like with Smarter, obviously there was already recharge. Versus, I guess I use a really terrible pun here, doing something novel and creating a product that doesn't exist yet. With when you launched back, I don't even remember when that was. Probably like 2 years ago, year and a half ago.
Something like a year and a half. Yeah. No, I could tell you. I mean, yeah, it's so with it's totally different, like night and day different, and that's kind of interesting because I think it's good you called that out because yeah, I think that to the outside world maybe there's just this one lump of this thing called entrepreneurship, right? But like trying to make a Facebook competitor versus making Facebook when there is no Facebook. Actually, that's a bad example because there was MySpace. But I think you get the point where it's like if you are doing the new thing, right? Versus like going after like something that already exists and is proven, right? It's just two extremely different models of business and startup. So so in my case for Smarter, like, and I guess, I mean, all right, I've got a sample size of, one of each, right? But what I can say from that is with going after recharge, right? Which is funny now because Oshin and I talk all the time. And so, like I know his side of that story too, right?
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, you trade that, experience of finding product market fit in for just extreme execution risk, right? Like there's sort of like you could kind of think of like with two forms of risk broadly with a startup. There's like market risk, right? Do people actually want this thing, right? And then there's execution risk, which is like, can I actually deliver this thing, right? Like if you can make a time machine, that's pretty much all execution risk, impossible to date, right? But the question is, can you actually do it, right? Versus, if you can make like, I don't know, like other things, right? Like MySpace before MySpace existed, right? It would have been unclear that, whether or not like people actually wanted that, like the technology to do it existed for a while.
And the
right?
winner isn't always the one first to market, obviously, like in that example with MySpace and Facebook,
Totally. Yeah. So like, I think that there's, the interesting thing with the challenger model, if you will, if you want to refer to it as that, right? Like with me going after recharge, it's like all in the execution risk. So it's like me as a founder, it's like the hours and just the sheer amount of effort, right? It's kind of like a metaphor might be like, seeing Serena Williams play tennis and being like, all right, I'm going to try to beat Serena Williams at tennis, right? That's kind of what it's like to go against a $2 billion company when it's just you by yourself, like, like in the middle of a pandemic, right? like at your house, right? So, like it kind of feels like a total act of lunacy, right? But if you just kind of pour all of your effort into it, right? Uh, Basically, they're like, and this was, I guess, an interesting learning from that experience is that you actually might have a shot, right? Because it would feel impossible, right? If you're like, I'm going to beat Serena Williams, or Venus Williams at tennis, right? But it's like, all right, if you make your entire life about it, like you actually do have a shot, right? And because like it's possible that just no one is as obsessed as you, right? And so that's what that was like, I mean, but it was like super nerve wracking. So it's kind of like you're like chasing, like you like it's very well defined what you have to do, right? If you're taking on, like Serena Williams at tennis, right? Like you just have to be a very, very good tennis player and practice your ass off. It's like but it's well defined, right? Whereas, and so it's just an extremely, like, maybe like hiking Mount Everest or right, is another example where it's like very well defined. You might die like if you do it, right? But like the path is clear, right? And so yeah, the whole thing was just like a slog, right? Like it was like there were times, particularly, I mean, it's the pandemic, so it's like there wasn't much else to do, which I think helped, me and the team be super focused. But yeah, there were times I was working like, pulling like 2 all-nighters a week doing that, right? Like you just like grinding the hardest, possible, which was like insane, like then you like go talk to a customer and it's like, you like barely, like taking like 3 shots of Cometeer and you're like, okay, all right, like hopefully my brain is together enough to do this. So that's what that's like. 'Cause it's just sheer effort to like, run as fast as you can after this person that's so far ahead. Then to start something new though, like the other way to do it, right? You then take on like real market risk, right? And it's like, I mean, and I think, like, right? Like we started like with this Web3 product, right? And don't get me wrong, like that's serving like a certain type of like, tech forward consumer and brand that likes that, right? Like blockchain is sort of like, it's weird. It's like, it's kind of like its own little like religion around a piece of technology, which myself as like a technologist, I'm like, I don't really know why that's there, but okay. Because to me it's just like code, but yeah, and so like, at one point it looked like like blockchain technology had hit this inflection point where it was going to get, mass consumer adoption. So this looked like a great idea, right? And then all of a sudden, it didn't look that way anymore. And then it stayed, confined to like, a certain group of people, right? And, that's, welcome to, adult life if you're taking on market risk, right? Like sometimes, the risk materializes, right? And so, so that was just a very different, that's like with subscriptions, right? It's like, the idea that people are going to like getting things over and over again and that merchants are going to like charging people money and over and over again, pretty foundational, not going to go away, right? Whereas, you're taking on real market risk if you go and try to do something new. And with wallet passes, I mean, similar thing. Here, I mean, I think I'd say we've taken much less market risk because the adoption of Apple Pay and Google Pay, right, which is like what we're kind of building on top of. That's like skyrocketed in the pandemic. Yeah, and then the idea of like, a new engagement channel, like there's a lot of ways in which this it's just a much more clear product to like immediately drop to your top and bottom line, right? So it's a very different experience.
Yeah. I don't think it's as concrete necessarily as like the subscription app space, because like that, like you had a very clearly defined path there, whereas we're essentially taking two, like let's say if we were like just doing an ATS or we were just doing a job board, then we'd have that clearly defined path. But we're trying to like toe the line between these synergies that come with having that integrated into one. And so it's like shades of the exact same. And like we have very clear execution path on like the ATS, but there's other things that are different or like its sort of own unique flair or differentiation factor because of the fact that, you know, there's like more data available or there's a different feedback loop. And so it'll be interesting to see how it evolves, because we're sort of attacking two different product offerings versus one.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. You know, that's actually a good way to phrase the challenger one too, is it's like, because you're so out resourced, right? And obviously you guys are doing something, you know, different beyond that. But it's like the innovations as opposed to one big innovation, right? Which is kind of you know, like what it was with Wild Passes for us now. Instead, it's like 1,000 little innovations, right? Because you kind of need a hack like every step of the way, because you're so out resourced, right? And so you know, so yeah, I think that is, you know, and I think, you know, you guys are like very well equipped to do that, but yeah, that's maybe another way to put it, is it's like you kind of just need all of these little innovations, so that you can just run a little bit further with a little bit less.
Yeah. Honestly, the scariest thing for me is the actual execution itself. Like I am hyper confident in the vision and what I think can happen and market adoption, but until we launch on September 1st, it's just like, well, shit, you know, what if we launch and it just, it doesn't work, or there's a bunch of bugs, or like shit hits the fan, and like, yeah, like I see that it's not happening, and like, you know, we obviously have the development team, we're doing all the testing and iteration and whatnot, but that always just sort of lingers in the back of my mind because I'm not a developer. So I'm not the one like actually responsible for the end product that's being displayed and delivered to the customer. And that's a new role for me to be in, because like with electric, obviously I was responsible for everything, and you know, it's just different.
Yeah, man, it's a gift and a curse. As someone that is, you know, a technical founder, it's like, all right, yeah, all right, it's a gift that you can like, you know, like ultimately get in there and fix things if you have to. But it's a curse because you technically can do every job. And so, yeah, you know, that's where the 2 all-nighters a week can come in, which is not necessarily healthy. So, yeah, you know, there's two sides to that coin. I sometimes envy it too for non-technical founders, the ability to kind of just put that stuff completely out of your brain, you know, and yeah, because sometimes it almost feels like I have like multiple personalities where I have to like switch between one, you know, it's sort of you're in the car working on the engine, right?
Yeah.
And then you jump out of the car and you're like, look at this awesome car, right? Like from the outside of the car. And it's like two, you know, it's like being a car salesman and a car mechanic at the same time.
Yep.
So yeah, which is, most people don't do both of those things. So yeah.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And that, but I think that's what part of the challenge of being an entrepreneur in general, whether you're technical or not, is just the ability to delegate. And you know, you're only going to be as strong as, especially if you want to, you know, build a sizable company, it's really dependent on the team. It's sort of out of your control in so many regards.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing, man, is just like it's like delegation and empowerment are like two sides of the same coin, and it's like yeah, I mean, like you almost like, I think the thing that is scarce in startups, and is frankly going to kind of decay from the founder outward, is this like deep sense of ownership, right? Like there's this feeling of like being on the hook, and so like obviously you need to have that and convey that to people, like how much you care, right? But also empowering them so that it's like, you know, like they feel the work that they're doing and contributing is meaningful, right? Rather than being like, can you please do this for me, right? It's kind of like, because that would be sort of like the full delegation style of doing that, right? It's like, here's how what you're doing is really important and is going to make us all, build a great company together, right?
Especially at this stage where it's like, if you wanted a cush job that paid a bunch and, maybe wasn't as rewarding or fulfilling, like that's out there, but you're not coming to the 2-person startup, for the big fancy paycheck and all the perks and benefits and whatnot. There has to be value intrinsically within your business and what you're doing and what you're building. Otherwise, nobody's going to want to work for you.
Totally. I mean, well, and I think that, having been because I certainly, after like, my first company and the experience of that, I considered like, fuck, do I never want to do this again? But yeah, I mean, I think there's something just addicting about like the grand adventure that is starting something from nothing. It's the hardest thing to do in business, right? Like to start something from nothing. Yeah, I mean, one thing that, maybe a lot of people don't think about, it's like being an entrepreneur is something that everyone knows, or joining an early stage startup, right? It's something that everyone knows is the way to make the most money, like in the economy, right? And everyone likes money, right? And so it's the way to make the most money in the economy, right? Potentially, right? Obviously, there's risk doesn't work out. And there's actually nothing in terms of, like unlike, say a job at Goldman Sachs or these other, right? Like where you have to work, your whole life and go to specific schools and all these other things to get those jobs, right? Technically anyone can, register an LLC and start a company tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
So it's the way that, potentially pays the most. It has actually, basically no barrier to entry, right? And yet very, very few people do it, right? But once you have, right, like once you've kind of crossed that chasm, right, and sort of seen, like proven to yourself that you might have what it takes, I do think it's kind of like addicting, and it would be really hard to go back. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm screwed. Like I've resigned myself to the fact that I'm sort of screwed in the sense that I am not going to be able to like take on a typical job, even if like I needed to. And I also would be the worst employee ever. Like I would be terrible. Like I'd want to be doing 1,000 things. I'd be causing more trouble than like anybody above me would want. Like, oh God, like can Brandon just like shut up and stop trying to change all these processes and like do all this crap? Like I would be a terrible employee.
Yeah, maybe that's it actually. Like you just can't go back. So once you've crossed that chasm. So yeah, no, maybe every entrepreneur just becomes unemployable. So so then they have to.
Exactly. I think for me, like it was, I don't want to say it was easy, but I think I had a easier time doing it than a lot of folks I've spoken to because I did it in college when I had no real like responsibilities or things that I had to worry about. But when I see people who do it, like who have like, I don't know, have like 3 kids and like a very stable job and like all these other things that are not only like factoring into their financial or their risk appetite when it comes to finances, but also time.
Yeah.
Like if you have 3 kids and you got stuff on the weekends, and like I get all my work done on the weekends, so I can't even imagine like having kids. I'm like, when the hell would I actually be able to do work? And so I really find it admirable and is hopefully something I'll have to deal with eventually. But like, how do you balance all these different things? And I think you just have to become so hyper efficient with your time and just very, very organized to make sure that you're still able to check all the boxes.
Yeah, you might, have inferred from my background, this robot and this dragon over here. That's not my own. So yes, I do have a 5-year-old son. And yeah, I mean, I guess my best answer to that is I have an extremely supportive wife who puts up with my lunacy. Yeah, and so but I mean, seriously, like, yeah, I mean, it's a little crazy story. I met my wife in a laundromat when I was 22. So, uh, yeah, so I would say that was, the luckiest thing that has ever happened to me. And, and, uh, yeah, I mean, I think basically, like, I kind of said it jokingly, like, a supportive wife, but that is actually probably, what helps me get keep it together and keep going on this path.
I feel like having a supportive partner, whether it's a wife or just people in your circle in general, is
Yeah,
very important. Because
yeah,
you can't do everything yourself.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've got, I mean, it's not just my wife. I've got, basically like a group of people. I mean, and I guess this is just, me and how I live my life, and it's how I've been able to, recruit for and get these people that are extremely talented to quit their, jobs at Uber or wherever, and come join me on my crazy adventures. Is basically like from every place that every sort of chapter of my life, I've like I typically have like one or two like close friends, and so I've just sort of built that over the years, and yeah, I mean, and that is sort of my committee of sort of like life coach advisors, and I mean, they lean on me, I lean on them, so yes, that is certainly yeah, that certainly helps too. Um, you know, so
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, I've kept you here for quite some time. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on? Um, Last minute sort of tips or tricks for folks listening? Any anything?
yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of interesting, like we had no script, right? So we ended up talking about entrepreneurship, so sort of like meta business talk rather than talking about, like our businesses themselves and what they actually do. Um, yeah, so I guess with that in mind, though, I guess keeping on that, I mean, I guess the best advice that I've ever gotten, well, all right, the best advice that I've ever gotten about, sort of like um, starting a company, there's a few things. One is, and this is sort of broader to life advice, there's be more excited than you are scared. Uh, and like that applies to like, sort of a lot of like high pressure situations, like giving a speech, doing a job interview, stuff like that. Like me being on this podcast now, right? Like inevitably, there's going to be some nervousness, right? And so you basically, and I think our instinct is to sort of like try to suppress that. And, and I think that psychologically, at least, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but like what I can say has worked better for me is to focus on sort of feeding the excitement rather than trying to suppress the fear, right?
Mhm.
And so, I mean, and look, like I was a very introverted engineer, and I had to learn how to, pitch world class investors to get them to invest in my company, and I'd say, that sort of helped a lot. Uh, there's something called the Stockdale paradox too, which is like which a friend shared with me actually, like in the middle of when I was struggling with my first time ever fundraising for Smarter, which I was ultimately successful in. Um, yeah, there was the Stockdale paradox is I'm gonna butcher it, but it's basically uh, like it's basically like you need to have sort of ultimate faith that you will like succeed in the long term, right? But don't let that blind you to the sort of most brutal realities in front of you, right? So it's like almost have this like what some might view as unrealistic faith in yourself that you will succeed long term, right? But be extremely realistic about the challenges that are in front of you. And the context of that is it actually comes from this guy that was a survivor of a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And and I think that that actually is also humbling as a reminder too. It's like, like it's like, this is what, this is this guy's advice for like getting through this like prisoner of war situation. And it's very useful, but also a reminder that, like in the ups and downs that can be wild in entrepreneurship, right? Like you're not a prisoner of war in Vietnam. Like, so,
So stop complaining.
overall, yes, overall first world problems, definitely, even though it doesn't feel like that sometimes. Yeah. And then, I think the other one, I think is, yeah, basically to just like play the long game. Cause like, I think that is like, it's how I've seen like, I guess a lot of people, shoot themselves in the foot is, sort of like startups are about kind of growing the pie, right? And I think by trying to grab more of the pie, right? So then thinking of it as like a fixed pie rather than like trying to grow the pie, right? Um, actually, that's a thing in psychology, like a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And, um, and I think that is like something that is probably it's probably the most important thing to look for in hiring for a startup, is people that share that kind of like growth mindset. Um, like, because it's like, if you just kind of, like survival as a startup, and making the business work is hard enough, right? As is. And so then if you just like, like you all need to be kind of like focused on that, right? And making the startup work, right? Rather than sort of like trying to edge over on each other and like play sharp elbowed, typical, candidly, like office politics in a place like Goldman Sachs, right? Um, so if you're sort of thinking with that zero sum game mindset, right? Like letting someone like that into your company that's a startup, I think can, like, even like one person, right? That has that mindset, I think can be really detrimental. Like versus, like a positive, like zero sum game thinking versus positive sum game thinking. Because, I think that's the beauty of a startup is that it can be this team win, right? And so I think it's really important to make sure that everyone is oriented around that.
Yeah, those first team members are critical in the long-term success of the business for sure. And whether or not like they're really there to help, they build the culture with you, they sort of set the tone for the rest of the team members as well. And one bad
Yeah.
apple can cause quite a few issues.
Yeah. And it's like, and it just kind of like, messes up that beautiful dynamic that it can be for you to kind of like be in this to win together, and so, but that's, I think the thing, I guess the encouraging note for entrepreneurship is that it really can be this team win, right? And I think that that's something kind of like rare, candidly, like in the workplace, right? Like a lot of times, particularly in corporate environments, it's like, it's like you or the guy next to you getting this promotion, right? And it's kind of hard to make, lifelong friends in that situation. And, really lifelong friends, I think are like, I mean, there's like books on this, right? Like that's kind of the ultimate currency of life, right? Is, like that's what makes people happy is long-term friendships.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a way, I think a beautiful thing is that startups can sort of build that into, your life in an organic way. So, anyways,
I'd say definitely some of my closest friends are from work.
Yeah.
Probably more actually than those not from work. Just
Yeah.
I think part of that is inherent with also being a founder is that like you're doing your night shifts and spending a lot of the time
Yeah.
on your business, so it's difficult to keep or create or start relationships outside of that as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we're on the night shift together. Like we're both green on Slack, so so. But anyways, this has been great, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah,
And
thanks for coming on.
look forward to hearing more about Scaleless as you roll it out.
Yeah, I'm excited. Quickly before we hop off, can you let people know where they can find you and Novel online?
Sure, yeah. I mean, social media wise, like I'm most present on LinkedIn, definitely, and Novel correspondingly is as well. Although we do the Twitter thing some too. Um, but yeah, I mean, novel.com actually, you talk about luck. One of our investors owned novel.com, right? So yeah, so that's how we got, like a one word, like we didn't have to end up being like, get novel dot, XYZ or whatever.
Yeah,
And so yeah, you sort of make your own luck by showing up, but that was a pretty crazy one. So novel.com is our company's website.
nice. That's a good investor to have.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks
Yeah.
for coming on. For everybody listening, as always, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at brandonamoroso.com or electricmarketing.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.